In a small, sleepy town nestled between rolling hills, a storm brewed behind its peaceful facade. The sun cast long shadows as the townsfolk whispered in hushed tones about the trial of young Thomas Evans. He was a simple farmer known for his kindness and hard work, but now he stood accused of a crime no one believed he could commit. The charge was grave murder. One fateful night, the body of a wealthy merchant was found near the edge of town, and panic gripped the community. With emotions running high, suspicion quickly fell on Thomas, who had been seen near the market that evening. Though there were no solid facts tying him to the crime, the urgency for justice swept through town like wildfire. As the trial date approached, many had already made up their minds about Thomas's guilt. But what everyone didn't know was that even before the trial began, fate had cruelly hung in the balance. Gallows were being built, signaling that while justice was promised, it might already be predetermined. The stage was set for a battle between truth and the town's desperate thirst for closure. The town of Willow Creek lay cradled in a valley, where blooming wildflowers dotted the grassy hills, but a shadow loomed over its beauty. In the middle of the village stood a weathered courthouse, its clock tower keeping watch like a sentinel, ticking away the seconds until justice was to be served. On the streets, whispered conversations filled the air, thick with tension as townspeople hurried about their daily routines, their faces pale and anxious. At the tavern, patrons gathered in small groups, discussing the trial with furrowed brows and low voices. The once lively atmosphere had turned somber. Laughter had faded into nervous murmurs. Children played in the distance, unaware of the dark cloud hanging over their families. Rumors spread quickly, building uncertainty and fear among neighbors who once shared their lives easily. As the trial date loomed closer, storefronts displayed darkened signs urging townsfolk to remember Thomas's supposed guilt. Meanwhile, beyond the town square, workers erected gallows behind closed doors, the grim reminder of their collective anticipation for something that felt more like punishment than justice. The heart of Willow Creek now beat in sync with a troubling dread that would soon unfold. The sun dipped below the hills, casting a golden hue across Willow Creek as shadows lengthened. It was during this twilight that whispers about the accusation against Thomas Evans began to echo through town. The charge of murder was not just serious. It had ignited fear and anger within the community. A wealthy merchant, known for his dealings and connections, had been found dead, and Thomas was swiftly named the prime suspect. The night of the murder, Thomas had been near the market selling his fresh produce. Several townspeople claimed to have seen him, although none could firmly place him at the scene when the crime occurred. Despite the lack of solid evidence, the air buzzed with accusations, fueled by a need for someone to blame. Some speculated that the merchant had made enemies due to his business practices, but that didn't matter. Thomas fit the narrative the townspeople wanted. As news spread like wildfire, those who once exchanged friendly greetings with Thomas now cast suspicious glances his way. The weight of the accusation hung heavily over him like a storm cloud, threatening to burst at any moment and consume all notions of fairness in Willow Creek. The day of the trial arrived, bringing with it a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of Willow Creek. The courthouse was packed, with townspeople eagerly jostling for a view of the proceedings. Murmurs filled the air, punctuated by anxious fidgeting as the gavel sounded, signaling the start of a spectacle that felt more like theater than true justice. Thomas entered the courtroom, his hands trembling slightly as he took his seat at the defendant's table. The eyes of his neighbors bore down on him, some filled with disdain and others with unease. The judge, an older man with a weary expression, called the case to order, and soon the prosecutor rose, delivering a fiery opening statement full of accusations that painted Thomas as a cold-hearted killer. Witness after witness was called, each one adding layers to the prosecution's case against Thomas. They recounted their versions of events from that fateful night, some outright lying while others twisted details to fit their narratives. Outside, the gallows loomed as a grim reminder of what awaited Thomas if he was found guilty. An unspoken verdict that cast a long shadow over everything unfolding inside. As the trial progressed, the prosecution unveiled its evidence against Thomas, weaving a narrative that aimed to solidify his guilt in the minds of the jury and townsfolk. One by one, witnesses took the stand, recounting their fragmented memories of that fateful night. An elderly shopkeeper claimed to have seen Thomas near the crime scene just moments before the merchant was found dead, while a frightened young woman testified that she heard raised voices between Thomas and the merchant earlier that evening. Photographs of the crime scene were displayed, showing a chaotic splatter of blood that sent gasps through the courtroom. The prosecutor skillfully connected dots, suggesting a motive rooted in jealousy over the merchant's wealth. Each piece of evidence felt heavy with accusation, but Thomas remained steadfast in his innocence, his heart pounding as he listened to lies being spun into truths. Yet, despite the emotional testimonies and dramatic flair of the prosecution, cracks began to show in their case. The defense attorney stood ready to challenge each claim, knowing that every detail could be crucial in revealing Thomas's innocence amidst this web of deceit. Outside, however, the gallows loomed larger than ever, an ominous reminder of how quickly justice could turn into a tragedy. As the trial wore on, Thomas's defense attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Clara, recognized the urgency of her task. She knew that to save Thomas, she had to dig deeper than the surface accusations. With confidence, she stood to present her strategy, focusing on creating reasonable doubt. Clara first called forth a witness who had been at the market the night of the murder. This witness, a kind-hearted farmer named Jack, testified that he had seen Thomas earlier in the evening but had left before the incident occurred. His account cast doubt on the timeline presented by the prosecution. Next, Clara meticulously challenged the credibility of the shopkeeper and young woman, highlighting inconsistencies in their testimonies. She pointed out that memories could be flawed, especially under stress, and emphasized how easily fear could distort the truth. To further strengthen her case, Clara introduced evidence that suggested other potential suspects, people with motives tied to the merchant's business dealings. As she laid out her arguments, hope flickered in Thomas's heart. With each counterpoint, Clara fought for justice, determined to illuminate the truth amidst the shadows of doubt. As the trial unfolded, the townspeople's reactions were a mix of fear, anger, and uncertainty. Gathered outside the courthouse, they formed small clusters, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against a shore. Some clung to the narrative that Thomas was guilty, convinced by the prosecution's dramatic presentation and desperate to see justice served after the merchant's tragic death. Yet others began to question the fairness of the proceedings. Whispers of doubt circulated among those who had once called Thomas a friend. A few elderly citizens shook their heads in disbelief, recalling memories of Thomas as a hard-working farmer with a kind heart. The idea that he could commit such a heinous act seemed incomprehensible to them. As Clara continued her defense, hope flickered among some who dared to believe in Thomas's innocence. They watched closely, debating within themselves whether justice would prevail or if the gallows would claim another life unjustly. This internal struggle mirrored the tension within the courtroom, a community divided as they grappled with their own biases and the weight of their decisions in this unfolding tragedy. The night before sentencing, a heavy silence enveloped Willow Creek, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the cool evening breeze. Inside his small farmhouse, Thomas sat alone in the dim light, grappling with the reality of what could happen. The gallows loomed large in his mind, a constant reminder of the fate that awaited him if found guilty. As he stared out the window at the darkened sky, memories of his simple life flooded back. Tending to his fields, sharing laughter with friends, and dreaming of a future that now felt snatched away. Meanwhile, Clara gathered her thoughts and prepared for the next day's battle. She pored over her notes late into the night, determined to leave no stone unturned in her fight for justice. Outside, some townspeople lit candles at their doorsteps, creating a flickering path of light against the gathering darkness. They prayed for fairness and justice as they felt an internal struggle between their fears and doubts. As dawn approached, Thomas resolved to hold on to hope despite the impending verdict. Little did he know that unexpected developments were about to unfold that would test not only his fate, but also the heart of Willow Creek itself. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, The gallows stood ominously silhouetted against the sky, a grim reminder of the expected fate awaiting Thomas Evans. Many townspeople were unaware that the structure had been built in secrecy well before the verdict was even declared. This act seemed to seal Thomas's doom, creating a chilling atmosphere that painted him as already guilty in the eyes of many. Rumors swirled about why the gallows were constructed so early. Some whispered that influential townsfolk, fearing an acquittal, had pushed for a swift execution to quell any unrest. Others believed it reflected a collective need for instant justice, fueled by their grief over the merchant's death. The sight of the gallows hanging heavy in the air affected everyone differently. Some felt comforted by its presence, believing it ensured safety for their community, while others shuddered at the thought of how swiftly justice could turn into vengeance. As Clara prepared for Thomas's fate during what would be a critical day in court, she felt a deep urgency to dismantle this narrative of guilt that had solidified around her client. There was still time for truth to prevail, she hoped, and for injustice to be challenged. The courtroom filled with an electric tension as the moment of truth approached. Thomas Evans awaited the verdict that could seal his fate. Clara stood by her client, her heart pounding in her chest, hoping her efforts to instill doubt had made an impact. The judge, with a solemn expression, glanced over the jury before asking for the verdict. As the foreman stood, silence enveloped the room. The townspeople held their breath, anxious to hear whether justice would prevail or if the gallows would claim an innocent life. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. When the foreman finally announced, "Guilty," an audible gasp echoed through the courthouse. Shockwaves rippled among Thomas's supporters and detractors alike. Cheers erupted from those who had rallied against him, but others stood frozen in disbelief, struggling to grasp how this could happen. Thomas felt his world crumble around him. Despair washed over him as he realized that all Clara's hard work had been for naught. Outside, the gallows loomed larger than ever, a grim reminder of an impending fate that now seemed inescapable. In the aftermath of the verdict, the atmosphere in Willow Creek shifted dramatically. As news of Thomas's conviction spread through the town, mixed emotions rippled among its residents. Some felt a sense of relief, believing justice had been served for the merchant, while others were filled with profound sadness and anger at what they perceived to be a miscarriage of justice. Clara, devastated by the outcome, immediately began planning an appeal, determined to fight for Thomas's life. She reached out to allies within the community who had begun to question the integrity of the trial. Meanwhile, Thomas was taken to jail, his spirit crushed but not broken. He clung to hope that truth would eventually prevail. Outside the courthouse, discussions erupted among townspeople. Some demanded a re-examination of the evidence, while others insisted that the gallows should be erected immediately. The division within the community deepened as friendships were strained and families took sides. As Clara worked tirelessly on her appeal, the clock ticked down towards Thomas's execution date, setting a race against time that would test not only her resolve, but also the heart of Willow Creek itself. Just when despair seemed to engulf Thomas and his supporters, a glimmer of hope emerged unexpectedly. Clara, poring over the case files late one night, stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence, an old ledger belonging to the merchant that detailed suspicious transactions with other parties in town. This document hinted at possible motives for others who may have wanted the merchant silenced. Excited by her discovery, Clara hurried to share the news with Thomas during their next meeting. As she explained her findings, Thomas's eyes brightened for the first time since the verdict. This new evidence could challenge the narrative against him and potentially lead to reopening the case. Clara quickly reached out to some townsfolk who had previously expressed doubts about the trial's fairness. As she gathered support, a renewed energy spread through the community, with some residents rallying to demand a retrial. The tide began to turn, as whispers of doubt about the initial verdict swirled through Willow Creek. With this newfound resolve, Clara felt determined to present her findings as soon as possible, hoping it would be enough to save Thomas from his grim fate and restore faith in justice. As Clara prepared for the final appeal process, time became both an ally and an enemy. She gathered a small team of supporters and legal experts who shared her determination to right the wrongs of the trial. With the new evidence from the merchant's ledger in hand, Clara meticulously built her case, highlighting inconsistencies in witness testimonies and pointing to the potential motives of other suspects. The appeal was filed just days before Thomas's scheduled execution, igniting a wave of renewed hope among his supporters in Willow Creek. A public meeting was organized, where Clara addressed an eager crowd, passionately detailing the flaws in the original trial and urging them to stay united for justice. The townspeople began to rally together, demanding that their voices be heard and that Thomas's case be reconsidered. As news of the appeal reached broader circles, local newspapers picked up the story, capturing public interest beyond Willow Creek. Clara felt a surge of determination as she prepared to present her arguments before the court, knowing that this was not just about saving Thomas, but also about restoring faith in a justice system that had faltered. The stage was set for a desperate fight against time and fate. In the end, the battle for Thomas Evans highlighted the fragile nature of justice and the profound impact that a tight-knit community can have on individual lives. Clara's relentless pursuit of truth and fairness served as a beacon of hope in a town clouded by distrust and division. As the appeal progressed, voices once silenced began to emerge, calling for greater scrutiny of the judicial process and demanding accountability from those in power. The renewed fervor within Willow Creek reflected a growing realization that justice isn't merely about verdicts, but about ensuring every voice is heard. Residents learned that true justice requires vigilance, cooperation, and a willingness to confront difficult truths. As newspapers continued to cover the evolving story, others outside Willow Creek began to take notice, prompting discussions that spread far beyond its borders. Ultimately, whether Thomas would be exonerated remained uncertain. However, Clara's fight inspired many to believe in the possibility of change. The gallows that once symbolized despair became a reminder of the resilience needed to challenge injustice. As hope flourished amid adversity, it marked a pivotal moment for Willow Creek as they collectively sought to redefine their understanding of justice and community.